Deep in the whispered forests of Pinecrest Valley, where legends breathe between ancient trees, the impossible unfolded on a misty autumn morning. 10-year-old Eli Matthews stood trembling before a circle of grim-faced hunters, his small hand clutching a worn leather pouch containing 3 shiny riverstones, a bird feather and his grandfather's compass, his most precious treasures. Before him, bound in heavy chains and bleeding from a shoulder wound, knelt the creature the valley elders had warned about for generations. 8 feet of muscle and mystery, with eyes that held more wisdom than fear despite its captivity. "Free him!" Eli's voice cracked but didn't waver. "I'll pay whatever you want." What could drive a child to trade everything for a monster's freedom? What ancient promise would be forged in that moment of unexpected courage? The pine-scented air carried whispers of coming autumn as Eli Matthews sat cross-legged on his favorite boulder overlooking Pinecrest Valley. His small fingers traced the worn leather cover of his grandfather's journal, the pages yellowed with age and wisdom. Inside, meticulously detailed sketches of local plants, animals, and cryptic notes about forest guardians told stories most villagers had long forgotten. "Pay attention to the whispers between the trees," Grandfather had always said before his passing last winter. The mountains share their secrets with those patient enough to listen. At 10 years old, Eli was already known as the odd one, the quiet boy who preferred the company of rustling leaves and curious squirrels. To the village children who mocked his threadbare clothes and solitary ways, Matthews, "Boys touched in the head," they'd whisper when he spoke of eagle conversations or the patterns of deer movements. "Spends too much time with them woods." Below in the valley, Pinecrest Village was a collection of wooden cabins and small gardens, a 4-hour drive from what locals called proper civilization. 57 residents, according to the faded welcome sign, a place where everyone knew everyone else's business, strengths and failings. Eli closed the journal and tucked it carefully into his backpack. His parents would be finishing their shifts soon, mother at the village clinic, father at the lumber mill. Good people loving in their distracted way. But the weight of survival left little room for indulging a boy's wild stories. A distant mechanical growl echoed through the valley. Chainsaws from the eastern ridge. The logging company was pushing deeper into the old-growth forest, despite village elders' protests. Progress, they called it. Jobs. Necessity. Eli followed a narrow deer trail down from his perch, moving with the practiced ease of someone who'd memorized every root and stone. The forest embraced him differently than other villages. Where they saw resources or danger, he recognized conversations, the soft moss greeting his fingers, the jay announcing his passage, the mushrooms sharing quiet secrets of decay and rebirth. "You're late again." "Dreamer," his mother said when he pushed open the cabin door, though her tired smile held no real reproach. Sarah Matthews' hands were cracked from disinfectant, her nurse's uniform exchanged for faded houseclothes. "Wash up. Dinner's almost ready." His father, Robert, nodded from where he examined hunting permits at the table, a man of few words whose shoulders carried the permanent slope of physical labor. "Any tracks today?" he asked, their familiar ritual. "Deer, rabbit, 1 bear about 2 miles up Crescent Stream," Eli reported, then hesitated. "And something else. Something big." His father's weathered face showed a flicker of interest before practicality reasserted itself. "Probably that old moose buck's been tracking. Don't venture too far tomorrow. Storm's coming." After dinner, Eli retreated to his small bedroom beneath the rafters, walls covered with his own drawings, animals both familiar and imagined. He removed his treasure pouch from around his neck, carefully emptying its contents. 3 river stones, smooth and swirled with colors no one else seemed to notice. A hawk feather gifted by the sky last spring. And his grandfather's brass compass, its needle perpetually drawn to true north. Through the window, the forest darkened into mystery. Most children feared those shadows, raised on cautionary tales of wolves and falls and the mountain devil that snatched disobedient children. But grandfather's stories had been different, tales of ancient protectors, Gentle giants who guarded the deepest wilderness from human greed. The old ways remember what modern minds forget, he'd whispered during their final walk together. When you find yourself alone in the deep woods and feel watched, don't run. Some eyes judge whether you're a threat, others whether you're a friend. Lightning flickered across distant peaks as Eli drifted toward sleep, his dreams filled with massive footprints and ancient trees. Outside, the wind carried a sound too deliberate to be natural, a rhythmic tapping on trees around the village perimeter, like sentinels marking their boundaries. In the pre-dawn darkness, he awoke suddenly, certain someone had called his name. The air felt electric with possibility. Tomorrow, he decided, he would follow the stream beyond grandfather's markers. Tomorrow, he would discover what left those impossible tracks. Tomorrow, everything would change. Morning mist clung to the pines as Eli ventured beyond the familiar boundaries of his daily explorations. The plaster in his backpack bumped rhythmically against his spine with each careful step. Grandfather had taught him to make casts of interesting tracks, a way to study and remember without disturbing the forest's residents. Got a feeling about it today, he whispered to a curious chickadee that followed his progress. Animals often accompanied him, as though recognizing something different in this human child. 2 miles up Crescent Stream, where the water curved around a massive boulder, Eli froze. The muddy bank displayed a perfect impression that made his heart race, a footprint nearly twice the length of his father's boot, with 5 distinct toes and a depth that suggested tremendous weight. Impossible, he breathed. Though grandfather had always said that word simply meant you hadn't learned enough yet. With trembling hands, Eli mixed the plaster powder with stream water in his metal cup, carefully pouring it into the impression. While it dried, he examined the surrounding area with newfound attention. 20 feet up, a thick branch had been snapped, far higher than any human could reach without equipment. Nearby, a peculiar arrangement of rocks formed an arrow shape, pointing deeper into the forest. This was no random formation. This was communication. The memory of last night's dream suddenly felt less like imagination and more like invitation. "You've been watching me," Eli said aloud to the silent forest. "Haven't you?" Only the wind answered, but it carried a scent he couldn't identify. Musky, wild, ancient. By midday, Eli carefully excavated the dried plaster cast, wrapping it in his spare shirt before placing it reverently in his backpack. Evidence, proof, though of what exactly? He wasn't entirely certain. The village came alive with evening activities as Eli slipped back through its outskirts. Outside the general store, a group of men gathered around Buck Thornton's mud-splattered truck. Buck, tall, bearded, with eyes that missed nothing, was the most renowned hunter in 3 counties. His voice carried across the square, bigger than any bear track I've ever seen. "Something's out there, gentlemen. Something that doesn't belong." Eli shrank against the hardware store wall, listening intently. "Mountain devil stories again, Buck?" Old Jim chuckled, lighting his pipe. "Thought we left those tales in our granddaddy's time." Buck spat onto the ground. "Mock if you want. But Miller's livestock didn't tear themselves apart. And that logger, Peterson's, boy, didn't imagine what he saw watching him from the ridge." A nervous murmur passed through the gathered. "Men, Forestry Service says it's just a bear." Someone offered. "Forestry Service hasn't spent 50 years in these mountains," Buck countered. "There's good money for whoever helps me bring in proof. State researchers would pay handsomely for a specimen of something undocumented." The word hung in the air, carefully chosen to avoid sounding superstitious while still suggesting something beyond ordinary explanation. "Village meeting tomorrow," announced Mayor Wilson, rubbing his grey beard thoughtfully. "We'll discuss proper precautions. No sense causing panic, but folks should be alert." Eli clutched his backpack tighter, feeling the outline of his cast. Should he show them? Would they listen to a child? Or would it simply accelerate whatever Buck was planning? Later that evening, Eli closed his bedroom door and carefully unwrapped his treasure. The cast had dried perfectly, every detail preserved in white plaster. He compared it to illustrations in his grandfather's journal: bear, elk, moose, mountain lion. Nothing matched. Nothing came close. On the final page of the journal, a sketch he'd never fully understood suddenly commanded his attention. Grandfather had labeled it simply Guardian. The proportions matched his cast exactly. Raised voices from the kitchen interrupted his examination. He spends too much time alone in those woods. Sarah! His father's concern was evident even through the closed door. With whatever's out there now, he's careful, Robert. And he knows these forests better than half the grown men in this village. He's a boy with his head in the clouds, and his grandfather's crazy stories filling it with "Don't." His mother's voice turned sharp. "Don't dismiss what your father taught him. Those crazy stories kept this village safe for generations before we decided we knew better." Silence fell, heavy with unspoken history. Eli tucked the cast under his bed and opened his window to the night air. Something had shifted in the forest's rhythm. The usual cricket songs were muted, as though the woods held its breath in anticipation. "I know you're real," he whispered toward the dark tree line, "and I'm not afraid." In the distance, a branch snapped, deliberately like a response. The community hall buzzed with tension as villagers packed the wooden benches. Eli slipped in beside his parents, eyes fixed on Buck Thornton, who stood at the front beside Mayor Wilson. Buck's silver rifle gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Intricate notches carved along its stock, one for each significant kill in his hunting career. "Folks, you all know why we're here," Mayor Wilson began, adjusting his glasses. "There's been incidents in our forests. Buck has something to show you." Buck nodded gravely and unrolled a large map across the table. 3 livestock attacks in 2 weeks. Logger sightings here and here. He marked locations with red pins. And this morning, Richards found his storage shed torn apart, processed meat gone. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Could be bears," suggested Mrs. Larson from the back. "That mining company upstream has disrupted their feeding grounds. Bears don't organize rocks into patterns," Buck countered, producing photographs that passed through the crowd. "Bears don't watch loggers from ridgelines, then disappear like ghosts." When the photos reached Eli, his breath caught. Distinct arrangements of stones formed symbols similar to those in his grandfather's journal. He glanced at his father, whose face had paled slightly. "I've contacted state wildlife authorities," continued Buck. "They're offering a substantial research grant for documentation and capture of an undocumented species. Money this town badly needs since the sawmill reduced operations." That struck a chord. Pinecrest had struggled economically for years. The promise of outside funds commanded attention. "I'm organizing a proper expedition," Buck announced. "Professional tracking, tranquilizer equipment. We'll bring back proof and the reward." Old Jim raised his hand. "And if this creature is what some of us suspect it might be, something that's lived alongside this village for generations." Buck's expression hardened. "Fairy tales don't pay bills, Jim. Giant forest men don't exist except in children's stories and drunk logger hallucinations." "My grandfather wasn't a drunk or a liar," Eli spoke up suddenly, then shrank under the collective gaze of the village. "He documented everything he saw." Buck's smile didn't reach his eyes. "No disrespect to your grandfather, boy. He was a fine man. But even fine men can believe strange things." Eli's father placed a warning hand on his shoulder. Mayor Wilson cleared his throat. "Buck's expedition leaves tomorrow. Volunteers can sign up tonight. For everyone else, standard precautions. No solo trips into the deep forest, secure food stores, report any unusual sightings." After the meeting dispersed, Eli watched Buck's recruitment. 5 men signed immediately. 2 local hunters, a logger who'd lost work in the recent cutbacks, and 2 younger men eager for adventure. Others lingered, uncertain. "You're making a mistake," Old Jim told Buck, voice low but carrying to where Eli eavesdropped behind a bulletin board. "There's a reason my generation left those woods undisturbed. Superstition kept this town poor, old man," Buck replied. "Progress means facing fears, not hiding from them." Jim shook his head. "There's a balance that's protected this valley. Break it at your peril." At home that night, Eli couldn't sleep. Through his window, he watched Buck's house across the village square, where lights burned late as the hunting party prepared. He made his decision quickly, packing his backpack with essentials, water bottle, grandfather's compass, the plaster cast, dried berries, and his small first aid kit. His mother checked on him shortly before midnight, and he feigned sleep until her footsteps retreated. Then he changed into his darkest clothes and waited. Pre-dawn brought hushed activity as Buck's team assembled. Eli watched from behind Mrs. Peterson's woodpile as they checked equipment. Rifles, tranquilizer guns, tracking gear, chains, and heavy-duty cages loaded onto ATVs. "Remember, $5,000 each when we bring it in," Buck told them. "Plus whatever the research follow-up pays. Enough to make a real difference for your families." The men nodded solemnly, purpose strengthening their resolve. When the hunting party departed, following the old logging road that would take them to the forest's deeper reaches, Eli counted to 100 before slipping after them. He knew alternate routes, quieter paths that paralleled the main trails. They had vehicles and weapons. He had knowledge and determination. That night, alone in the forest far beyond where he'd ever ventured before, Eli curled beneath a fallen log, listening to distant sounds of the hunters making camp. The darkness felt alive around him, watchful but not threatening. In his dreams, massive figures moved silently between ancient trees, their eyes reflecting starlight as they observed both the hunters and the boy who followed them. Dawn painted the forest in watercolor grays as Eli trailed the hunting party, keeping to the shadows of massive ferns and moss-draped boulders. The men moved with practiced efficiency, Buck taking point with his tracker's confidence, the others fanning out in search formation. "Fresh sign here," Buck called, kneeling beside a broken sapling. "Something big passed through no more than 2 hours ago." Eli's stomach tightened. He'd never ventured this deep into the old-growth forest, where centuries-old trees created cathedral spaces between their massive trunks. This was primeval territory, land unmarked on village maps, where logging companies hadn't yet reached with their mechanical saws and earth movers. One of the younger hunters, Davis, glanced nervously upward. "Place feels like it's watching us." "That's just wilderness playing mind tricks," Buck replied. But his hand rested on his rifle with telling readiness. For 3 hours, they pushed deeper into increasingly dense forest. Twice, Eli nearly lost them, forced to scramble up embankments when the hunting party changed course. Around midday, Buck raised his fist, signaling a halt. "We're setting traps here," he announced, removing heavy equipment from his pack. "Whatever it is, it's circling back to this area repeatedly." The men unloaded vicious-looking steel. Contraptions, modified bear traps with reinforced chains and spring mechanisms capable of holding creatures, far larger than any normal forest dweller. Eli watched in horror as they concealed 5 traps at strategic points, covering them with leaves and forest debris. "Remember, we want it alive," Buck instructed. "Tranquilizers only, unless your life's in danger. And if tranks don't work, ask the logger Collins." Buck patted his rifle. "Then we make sure we get enough intact for the researchers to study." The casual cruelty made Eli shiver. These weren't evil men. They were neighbors, people who nodded hello at the general store, who helped when winter storms knocked out power lines. Yet here, driven by money and Buck's certainty, they prepared to capture or kill a creature they didn't understand. As afternoon stretched toward evening, the hunters established a base camp in a small clearing. Eli retreated to a dense thicket nearly a quarter-mile away, forcing himself to eat dried berries, though his appetite had vanished. Darkness fell quickly beneath the heavy canopy, and with it came unfamiliar sounds. Deep, resonant calls, unlike any animal voice he recognized. The calls moved in a pattern, almost like communication. Near midnight, Eli jerked awake from half-sleep to the sound of metal snapping against metal, the distinctive sound of a trap closing. Seconds later, an earth-shaking roar echoed through the forest, a sound of pain and fury that stood every hair on Eli's body upright. From the hunter's camp came shouts and the beam of flashlights cutting through darkness. Eli scrambled to his feet, heart pounding. and moved toward the commotion with reckless speed. The scene that greeted him would remain burned in his memory forever. In a small ravine, illuminated by crossing flashlight beams, stood the creature of his grandfather's stories. Nearly 8 feet tall, with broad shoulders and powerful limbs covered in dark brown fur, it pulled desperately against a massive chain trap clamped around its left leg. Blood matted the fur where cruel metal teeth bit into flesh, but it was the creature's eyes that froze Eli in place. Deep amber eyes reflecting intelligence, pain, and something profoundly human despite the inhuman form. Eyes that suddenly locked directly onto Eli's hiding place with unnerving awareness. "We got it!" Buck's triumphant shout broke the moment. Davis' tranquilizer now. The creature roared again, a sound that contained rage, but also something like desperation. With one powerful motion, it jerked the chain, uprooting the small tree it had been anchored to. But the trap's weight still prevented escape. Buck raised his rifle, no longer concerned with taking the creature alive. "Can't risk losing it now." Without conscious thought, Eli burst from his hiding place. "Wait, don't shoot!" All flashlights swung toward him, momentarily blinding him with their glare. "Matthews, boy." Buck's voice registered disbelief. "What in God's name are you doing out here?" Eli stepped forward, trembling but determined, placing himself between the hunters and the wounded giant. Behind him, the creature had gone utterly still, its labored breathing the only sound. "He's not what you think," Eli said, voice steadier than he felt. "My grandfather wrote about them. They protected this valley for generations." Buck's expression hardened. "Get away from that thing before it tears you apart, boy. Now." The creature made a low sound, not a growl, but almost a rumble of communication. Eli felt it more than heard it, vibrating through his bones with ancient understanding. Silence stretched between heartbeats as the hunters' flashlights created a stage of harsh light in the midnight forest. Eli stood his ground, small body rigid with determination, while behind him the massive creature's breathing came in pained, ragged bursts. "Son, you're in a dangerous situation you don't understand," Buck said. The voice deliberately calm, though his rifle remained raised. "Step aside and let us handle this." "I understand perfectly," Eli replied, surprising himself with his steady voice. "You want to capture him for money, but he's not just an animal." The creature shifted, chains rattling as it adjusted its wounded leg. Several hunters flinched, raising their weapons higher. "For God's sake, Buck, get the boy out of there," urged Collins, the logger. "That thing could snap him in half without trying." Eli turned slightly, keeping both the creature and hunters in his peripheral vision. Up close, the Bigfoot's presence was overwhelming. A musky, earthy scent like fertile soil and pine resin, the sheer size of its broad chest and powerful limbs. Yet those eyes held no malice, only wariness and pain. "He hasn't hurt me," Eli pointed out. "He could have, but he didn't." Old Jim, who'd remained quiet since Eli's appearance, took a step forward. "The boy might be right. Remember the stories." Buck spat on the ground. "Stories don't pay bills, Jim. We discussed this." Desperation clawed at Eli's chest. He could feel the hunter's resolve hardening, see the calculating look in Buck's eyes as he assessed how to remove the boy with minimal risk. In moments they would act, tranquilize the creature or, worse, kill it despite its wounded state. With trembling fingers, Eli reached for the leather pouch around his neck. "I want to make a trade." This unexpected statement caused Buck to lower his rifle slightly. "A what?" "A trade," Eli repeated more confidently. "Something valuable for his freedom." A snort of disbelief came from one of the younger hunters, but Buck's expression shifted to curiosity. "What could you possibly offer that equals $5,000 per man, boy?" Eli carefully opened his pouch, pulling out 3 smooth river stones that caught the flashlight beams. One swirled with blue like a miniature earth, another with bands of amber and gold, the third deep green with flecks that seemed to glow. "These stones come from the sacred bend of Crescent Stream," Eli explained. "My grandfather showed me where. There's nowhere else they form like this." Behind him the creature made a sound, almost a hum of recognition. Next, Eli removed the hawk feather, its edge lined with silver in the harsh light. This came from the white hawk that nests above Eagle Cliff. No one's seen one in 50 years except me. Finally, his grandfather's compass, brass worn smooth from decades of use. This compass always points true, even in the deep caves where other compasses spin in circles. Buck looked torn between amusement and disbelief. You're offering pretty rocks and trinkets for a scientific discovery worth thousands? Boy, that creature represents the find of a lifetime. He represents more than money, Eli insisted. He's part of these mountains, part of our history. My grandfather's journal is full of stories about his kind protecting the valley. The creature's eyes hadn't left Eli's face. Something passed between them, an understanding beyond words, ancient and immediate. What makes you think it won't kill you, boy? Buck challenged, gesturing toward the wounded giant. What makes you think it won't turn on the village once free? Eli met the creature's gaze directly, finding unexpected certainty there. Because he could have hurt any of us long before now. He's been watching. Grandfather said they only reveal themselves when something's wrong, when the balance needs restoring. Old Jim nodded slowly. The boy speaks true to the old ways. A low, resonant sound emerged from the creature, not threatening but deliberate, like language beyond human comprehension. It shifted its massive weight, moving the wounded leg with careful precision, despite the pain it must have caused. Then, slowly, the creature extended one massive hand toward Eli, not grabbing, but palm up. An invitation, a response to the offered bargain. The hunters tensed, but Eli didn't hesitate. He placed his 3 river stones in the enormous palm, his small hand briefly touching the leathery skin and coarse fur. Let him go, Eli said. Turning back to Buck, my payment for his freedom. Buck's jaw tightened. But uncertainty had crept into his expression. Several other hunters exchanged glances, their certainty wavering in the face of the extraordinary connection unfolding before them. Buck, Jim said softly, some things matter more than money. Some bargains transcend what we think we know. Morning light filtered through the ancient canopy, casting dappled shadows across the standoff that had lasted through the long night hours. Neither the hunters nor Eli had been willing to leave. The wounded creature remained eerily still, amber eyes watchful, the chain from the trap trailing from its injured leg. This is madness, Buck muttered, running a hand through his beard. Hours of argument had left the hunting party divided. Davis and Collins stood firmly with Buck, while Jim and the other 2 hunters, Martinez and Weber, had gradually moved closer to Eli's position. Just a test, Jim suggested for the 3rd time. Release it. See what happens. Buck paced in tight circles. $5,000 each. That's what we're giving up on a boy's fairy tale. Maybe there are things in these mountains worth more than money, Martinez said quietly. His family had lived in the valley for 5 generations. My grandmother used to leave offerings at the forest edge during hard winters. Food always seemed more plentiful after, Weber nodded. My brother swears something pulled him from Sawmill Creek when he fell in during the flood of '98. Said it was too strong to be human, disappeared before others arrived. Buck's expression hardened. So we're making decisions based on superstition now. We're considering possibilities beyond what we thought we knew, Jim countered. He turned to Eli. Boy, are you certain? Willing to stake your life on this creature's intentions? Eli hadn't moved from his protective position. Exhaustion pulled at his small frame, but determination kept him upright. I'm certain. The creature made that resonant humming sound again, deeper than before. The river stones Eli had given him remained clutched carefully in his massive hand. Here's what we'll do, Jim announced, taking charge with the quiet authority of his years. Weber, you have the key to the trap. We'll unlock it, but keep our distance with weapons ready. If the creature shows any aggression, we act. If not, we'll have lost our one chance. Buck finished bitterly. Jim met his gaze steadily, or prevented a terrible mistake. After tense negotiation, they arranged themselves in a wide semicircle. Weber approached the trap with extreme caution, key extended. The creature watched every movement, but remained perfectly still, understanding evident in its posture. Easy now, Weber murmured. Whether to himself or the creature wasn't clear. The key slid into the lock, turned with a heavy click. The trap's jaws sprang open, releasing their cruel grip on matted fur and bloodied flesh. The creature made no sudden movement, only shifted its weight to relieve the injured leg. Blood seeped from puncture wounds, but the damage appeared less severe than feared. The thick fur and muscle had prevented the worst. Weber retreated quickly. Rejoining the semicircle of hunters, an expectant hush fell over the forest. Even the birds had gone silent, as though witnessing something momentous. The creature rose to its full height, nearly 8 feet of muscle and mystery. Several hunters raised their rifles instinctively, but Jim gestured for calm. With deliberate care, the Bigfoot placed Eli's 3 river stones in a small depression at the base of a nearby tree. A gesture of safekeeping, not rejection. Then, to everyone's astonishment, the creature knelt before Eli, bringing their faces level. Up close, Eli could see intelligence in those amber eyes, ancient wisdom coupled with gentle curiosity. Hot breath smelling of wild herbs and forest mushrooms washed over him. One massive hand reached out, not to harm, but to touch Eli's chest directly over his heart. The gesture carried unmistakable meaning, even without words. Connection, recognition, promise. Eli responded without fear, placing his small hand over the creature's heart in return. "I know," he whispered. "I understand," Buck's voice cracked the moment. "This proves nothing. It's still a wild animal." The creature's head turned, regarding Buck with surprising dignity despite its wounded state. Then it did something none expected. It reached for the broken chain, still attached to its leg, snapped the heavy links with a casual twist of enormous hands, and placed the broken sections at Eli's feet. The message was clear. Strength restrained by choice. "Not inability, my God," breathed Martinez. Lowering his weapon completely, the creature looked once more at Eli, a gaze that somehow conveyed both gratitude and promise. Then it turned and moved toward the deeper forest with surprising grace despite its injury, pausing once to look back at the assembled humans. "He'll remember," Eli said with absolute certainty. "Everything we did here, the cruelty and the kindness." As the massive figure disappeared into the shadows between ancient trees, birds resumed their morning songs, as though acknowledging the restoration of natural order. Jim placed a weathered hand on Eli's shoulder. "Your grandfather would be proud, boy." Buck spat on the ground, eyes hard with thwarted purpose. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." The forest seemed to exhale as the creature disappeared among the ancient trees. But the momentary peace shattered when Buck suddenly shouldered his rifle. $5,000 walking away, he growled, taking aim at the retreating figure. "I won't let fairy tales cost us our future." Eli lunged forward. "No!" The rifle discharged with a thunderous crack that sent birds exploding from the canopy. But Buck's aim, normally flawless, went wild as Jim shoved his arm upward at the critical moment. "Have you lost your mind?" Jim shouted, face flushed with anger. Buck's response died in his throat as an earth-shaking roar echoed through the forest. The creature had whirled at the sound of the shot, eyes now blazing with a fury that transformed its entire bearing. No longer the dignified, restrained being of moments before, now it embodied primal wilderness rage. "Run!" Davis cried, already backing away, but it was too late. The creature covered the distance between the trees and the hunting party with astonishing speed, moving like a force of nature rather than flesh and blood. With one powerful sweep of its arm, it sent Buck flying into the underbrush, the silver rifle spinning away into the ferns. The other hunters scattered in panic. Martinez tripped over an exposed root, his own weapon discharging harmlessly into the canopy. Weber froze in place, eyes wide with terror. Eli alone stood his ground, arms outstretched toward the enraged giant. "Stop, please." Remarkably, the creature paused, chest heaving with barely contained fury. Its gaze locked with Eli's, recognition battling instinct. "He's scared," Eli explained, gesturing toward Buck, who was struggling to his feet, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "Scared people do stupid things. But he missed on purpose. The lie came easily, necessary to prevent further violence. The creature's breathing gradually slowed, intelligence reasserting itself over rage. It turned its attention to Buck, who had retrieved his hunting knife and stood in a defensive crouch. "Stay back, boy," Buck warned, though his voice trembled. "It's shown its true nature now, after you shot at it." Jim countered, positioning himself between Buck and Eli. "What did you expect?" From the underbrush, Collins raised his tranquilizer gun with shaking hands. Before anyone could shout warning, he fired. The dart struck the creature's shoulder with a soft thwack. Everything happened at once. The creature roared again, reaching to pull out the dart. Buck lunged forward with his knife. Eli threw himself between them. Jim shouted. And the creature, moving with desperate speed, scooped Eli up in one massive arm while using the other to shove Buck back with such force that his hunting jacket ripped from collar to waist. "No!" Martinez cried. "It's taken the boy!" But Eli wasn't struggling. Instead, he clung to the creature's fur as it bounded away from the chaos, heading deeper into the forest with ground-eating strides. The tranquilizer's effects hadn't fully taken hold, but the creature's movements were already becoming less coordinated. "After them!" Buck shouted, stumbling to his feet again. Blood matted his beard, his eyes wild with a mixture of fear and determination. "It'll kill him once it's far enough away." Jim grabbed Buck's arm. "You don't know that. I know what I saw," Buck snarled, jerking free. "That thing's a monster, and it's got a child. Are you coming or not?" The hunting party gathered their scattered equipment with frantic haste. The tranquilizer would slow the creature, but they all knew the forest belonged to it in ways they could never match. Meanwhile, cradled against the creature's massive chest, Eli experienced a journey unlike any human had known in generations. Despite its injury and the tranquilizer beginning to affect its system, the Bigfoot moved through the forest with intimate familiarity, crossing streams at hidden shallows, ducking under fallen logs, weaving between trees with balletic precision. "They'll follow," Eli said, uncertain if the creature understood his words, but trying anyway. "Buck won't give up." The creature made a low rumbling sound that vibrated through its chest against Eli's body. Whether acknowledgement or something else, Eli couldn't tell. But there was no aggression in how it held him, only protective care. After what seemed like miles, the creature's pace finally slowed. The tranquilizer and blood loss were taking their toll. It paused in a small clearing, gently setting Eli on a moss-covered stone before dropping to one knee. Breathing heavily. "You're hurt," Eli said, reaching toward the bloody leg wound. The creature's amber eyes, now dulled with exhaustion and chemical sedation, studied him with unmistakable intelligence. One massive hand gestured toward the direction they had come, then made a pushing motion. "No," Eli said firmly. "I'm not leaving you like this." In the distance, faintly but growing closer, came the sound of humans crashing through the underbrush. Calling Eli's name mixed with shouts of determination and fear. Twilight deepened the forest shadows as Eli helped the massive creature limp away from the pursuing voices. Each step became more labored as the tranquilizer spread through its system. Twice it stumbled, catching itself against ancient tree trunks that groaned under its weight. "We need shelter," Eli whispered, though he wasn't sure if the creature understood his words. "Somewhere to hide until morning." The Bigfoot made a low rumbling sound deep in its chest. Despite its increasingly uncoordinated movements, it deliberately changed direction, leading them along a nearly invisible game trail that wound between massive boulders. Its nostrils flared, scenting the air with each labored breath. After another half-mile, when Eli feared the creature might collapse entirely, the narrow path opened onto a small grotto hidden within a cliff face. A natural cave, its entrance partially concealed by hanging vines and moss. The creature ducked inside, pulling Eli gently after it. The cave extended perhaps 30 feet into the mountainside, dry and remarkably free of debris. In one corner lay a bed of dried grasses and soft moss. Along the walls, small niches held collections of unusual stones, feathers, and what appeared to be carefully preserved plants. "This is your home," Eli realized aloud. The creature sank heavily onto the moss bed, its breathing labored. In the dim light filtering through the cave entrance, Eli could see blood still seeping from the leg wound. The tranquilizer dart remained embedded in its shoulder. Drawing on his grandfather's teachings, Eli knew he needed to act quickly. He removed his small first aid kit from his backpack, then hesitated before the enormity of the creature's size. His supplies seemed woefully inadequate. "I need to clean your wounds," he said, meeting the creature's increasingly unfocused gaze. "The dart, too. It needs to come out." The Bigfoot's massive head tilted, studying him. Then, with deliberate care, it extended its arm, offering access to the embedded dart. Eli worked quickly, using his pocket knife to carefully extract the dart without breaking the needle. The creature didn't flinch, though a low rumble vibrated through its chest. "Now the leg," Eli said, pointing to indicate his intentions. The chain trap had left puncture wounds that needed cleaning. As Eli used the last of his water and antiseptic wipes, he noticed patterns in the creature's fur, subtle swirls and color variations unique as fingerprints. Despite its wild nature, its fur was surprisingly clean, smelling of pine resin and forest herbs rather than animal musk. "We need something better for medicine," Eli muttered. Frustrated by his limited supplies, the creature's eyes had been growing heavier with the tranquilizer's effect, but at these words, it roused itself. With surprising coordination given its condition, it reached toward one of the wall niches, retrieving several dried plants and a small clay bowl. "You want me to use these?" Eli asked, taking the offering. A slow blink seemed to confirm his question. At the cave entrance, Eli found a tiny spring trickling from the rock face. He filled the bowl, returning to crush the dried plants, as he'd seen his grandfather do countless times. The paste that formed smelled sharply medicinal. "Is this right?" he asked, showing the mixture. The creature made a soft huffing sound that somehow conveyed approval. With gentle fingers, Eli applied the green paste to both the leg wound and the dart puncture. The effect was immediate. The bleeding slowed, and the creature's tension visibly eased. "I'll call you Coda," Eli said suddenly, remembering his grandfather's stories of forest guardians. "It means friend in the old language." The creature, Coda, studied him with those intelligent amber eyes, now heavy-lidded with exhaustion and sedation. One massive hand reached out, touching Eli's chest over his heart, repeating the gesture from their first connection. "I know," Eli whispered. "I'll stay." As darkness claimed the forest, Coda finally succumbed to the tranquilizer, breathing deep and even. Eli placed his small jacket over the wound as an additional barrier, then settled himself beside the massive form, drawing warmth from Coda's dense fur against the cave's chill. Outside, distant shouts indicated the hunters still searched, but they had lost the trail in the gathering darkness. They would resume at dawn, Eli knew, but for now this hidden sanctuary offered temporary safety. His thoughts turned to his parents. They would be frantic by now. The village would be organizing search parties. Would anyone believe what had happened? Would they understand why he'd chosen to help this creature rather than return home? Grandfather would have understood. This thought comforted him as exhaustion pulled him towards sleep. In his last moments of consciousness, Eli felt something extraordinary. Coda's massive arm shifting to create a protective curve around his small body. A gesture so deliberate it could not be dismissed as unconscious movement. Even in sleep, the forest guardian watched over him. Morning would bring new dangers, difficult decisions, and the challenge of deeper communication with a being of legend. But for now, in this ancient cave smelling of earth and history, a boy and a myth shared peaceful refuge in the heart of the wilderness that belonged to them both. Dawn filtered through the cave entrance, painting the stone walls with amber light. Eli woke to find Coda already alert, sitting at the cave mouth, massive frame silhouetted against the morning glow. The creature's wounds looked remarkably improved. The medicinal paste had worked better than any modern antibiotic. "How do you feel?" Eli asked, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Koda turned, regarding him with clear, intelligent eyes. The tranquilizer had worn off during the night. With deliberate movements, the creature flexed its injured leg, then made a low, satisfied rumble. Outside, birdsong had returned to normal patterns, suggesting the hunters weren't in the immediate vicinity. They would still be searching, Eli knew, but they'd lost the trail in darkness. Koda rose to its full height, ducking slightly under the cave ceiling, and gestured for Eli to follow. At the entrance, the creature scanned the forest with all senses, nostrils flaring, ears swiveling, eyes missing nothing. When satisfied, Koda led Eli along hidden pathways that no human trail crossed. They moved deeper into the mountains, into territory unmarked on any village map. The forest changed subtly. Trees grew larger, undergrowth sparser, light filtering through the canopy with an almost ethereal quality. After an hour's journey, Koda paused at the edge of a small rise, waiting for Eli to catch up. As the boy crested the hill, his breath caught in his throat. Before them spread a hidden valley, perhaps a half-mile across, encircled by protective ridges. At its center stood the most magnificent trees Eli had ever seen, giants that dwarfed even the old-growth forest surrounding the village. Their massive trunks would have taken 10 men joining hands to encircle, their lowest branches beginning 100 feet up, creating a cathedral-like space beneath. Most remarkable of all, throughout the grove, clusters of mushrooms emitted a subtle blue-green luminescence even in daylight, creating pools of otherworldly light. "It's beautiful," Eli whispered. Koda made a deep, satisfied sound, clearly pleased by the boy's reaction. With gentle urgency, the creature guided him into the valley. As they entered the grove, Eli noticed signs of habitation, not a village in the human sense, but evidence of intelligent presence. Stones arranged in precise patterns, simple tools fashioned from wood and stone resting against tree trunks, woven grass baskets containing dried berries and nuts. "You live here," Eli said, understanding dawning. "Not just in the cave, here, in this whole valley." Koda led him to the largest tree at the grove's center. Its base contained a hollow large enough for several creatures Koda's size to shelter comfortably. Inside, dried grasses formed sleeping areas, while niches in the living wood held collected treasures, unusual stones, feathers, fragments of deer antler, and what appeared to be very old human-made items: a metal button, a tarnished silver spoon, a child's worn leather shoe. But most fascinating were the marks covering the inner walls, not random scratches but organized symbols, repeated in patterns that suggested language or record-keeping. Koda touched several of these marks, then gestured to the entire grove with a sweeping motion. "Your history," Eli guessed. "The story of your people." The creature nodded, the human gesture incongruous, yet perfectly understood. Koda then directed Eli's attention to a specific section of symbols. With careful movements, the creature traced a pattern of circles, first many, then fewer, then only one. "There were more of you," Eli translated slowly. "But now, you're alone." Koda's amber eyes reflected profound sadness. A low, mournful sound emerged from deep in his chest. He touched his own heart, then made a spreading motion with his hands that somehow conveyed departure, loss, ending. "Your family. They're gone?" Koda nodded again, then pointed to another series of marks showing smaller figures alongside the larger ones. "You had children? Little ones like you?" Another nod, followed by a gesture toward the mountains beyond the valley. "They went away." "Left the valley?" Koda shook his massive head, then mimicked something falling from above, making a rumbling sound deep in his throat. "A landslide." "Earthquake?" Eli guessed, heart aching at the story emerging through their limited communication. Koda confirmed with a solemn nod, then traced a pattern of time passing on the wall. "Seasons, moons, years. How long have you been alone?" Eli asked softly. The creature spread his hands wide, longer than could easily be expressed. From the wall, Koda retrieved something Eli hadn't noticed before, a crude but recognizable carving of a human child. It was old, the wood darkened with age and handling. Beside it, were similar carvings of other human figures, spanning what must have been generations. You've watched over the village, Eli realized. All this time, you and your kind were protecting us. Coda placed the carving in Eli's hands, then pointed to a series of symbols that showed large figures standing between human figures and various dangers. Predators, floods, avalanches, the stories in Grandfather's journal, they were all true. You've been guardians of the valley for generations. As sunlight shifted through the ancient canopy, illuminating the mushroom circles with increased brilliance, Eli felt the weight of history and connection. He wasn't just meeting a legendary creature, he was being entrusted with the legacy of a mysterious, intelligent species that had lived alongside humans in secret harmony for centuries. "I understand now," he said softly, meeting Coda's gaze. "And I'll help others understand too." Sarah Matthews hadn't slept in 36 hours. Her eyes were red-rimmed as she pinned another handwritten flyer to the community board outside the general store. Missing. Eli Matthews. Age 10, last seen Tuesday evening. Description: brown hair, green eyes, approximately 4'6", wearing blue jacket, jeans, grey backpack. Please contact immediately if seen. Her hands trembled as she pushed in the last thumbtack. Behind her, Robert Matthews stood grim-faced, speaking with Mayor Wilson and Sheriff Kelly, who'd driven in from the county seat. "The hunting party still hasn't returned either," the sheriff was saying. "Could be the boy followed them. Buck knows these mountains better than anyone. If they found the boy, they might be bringing him back now." Sarah turned sharply. "It's been 2 days, Sheriff. 2 days my son has been missing." The community hall had transformed into search headquarters. Maps covered tables, marked with grid patterns and assigned sectors. Villagers gathered in teams, collecting water bottles and emergency supplies before heading out to their designated search areas. "We've covered the usual spots," Mrs. Peterson reported, her own eyes worried. She'd been Eli's teacher for 3 years. The Boulder Overlook, Crescent Stream, all his favorite places. He wouldn't just wander off, Sarah insisted for the 10th time. "He knows these woods, respects them." Jim entered the hall, removing his hat respectfully. After returning from the hunting expedition the previous evening without Buck or the others, he'd immediately joined the search efforts. "Any sign of Buck's team?" Mayor Wilson asked. Jim shook his head. "Nothing. They were still pursuing—" He hesitated, glancing at Eli's parents. "Pursuing what?" Robert demanded. The old hunter sighed heavily. "There's something you should know. When we found Buck's team, they'd captured something unusual in the deep forest. What does this have to do with my son?" Sarah asked, voice rising with fresh fear. Jim chose his words carefully. "Eli appeared while we were deciding what to do with the creature. He seemed to have a connection with it. When things went wrong, the creature took Eli with it into the forest." Stunned silence filled the hall. "Took him." Robert's voice cracked. "Are you saying some animal abducted my son?" "Not exactly an animal," Jim said cautiously. "Something else, something intelligent." Sheriff Kelly's expression hardened into skepticism. "What exactly are you describing, sir?" Before Jim could answer, the door burst open. 8-year-old Emma Matthews, Eli's younger sister who had been staying with neighbors, ran in clutching a worn notebook. "Mom, Dad, I found Eli's secret book." Sarah knelt to meet her daughter, taking the offered notebook. The leather cover was weather-beaten, the pages filled with Eli's careful handwriting and detailed drawings. "He hid it under his mattress," Emma explained. "I was looking for his favorite truck to keep safe until he comes home." Sarah flipped through pages of nature observations, plant identifications, and animal tracking notes, all meticulous beyond what most would expect from a 10-year-old. Then she gasped, stopping at detailed sketches spanning several pages. The drawings showed a massive, upright figure with a distinctly non-human yet intelligent face. Notes in Eli's handwriting recorded observations. 8+ feet tall, walks on 2 legs, fur darker in winter months, leaves arranged stones by the lightning tree. "This is what Eli's been tracking," she whispered. "All these months when we thought he was just exploring." Robert looked over her shoulder, face paling. That's impossible. Jim stepped closer, examining the drawings. No, it's not. That's exactly what we encountered. What Buck was hunting. What your son tried to protect. Sheriff Kelly rubbed his forehead. Are you people seriously suggesting Bigfoot? Emma said matter-of-factly. Eli told me stories about the forest guardians, but Mom said not to encourage him. A ripple went through the gathered villagers, part disbelief, a part ancestral recognition of old stories many had dismissed as fantasy. My grandfather spoke of them, Mrs. Peterson said quietly. Said they watched over the valley, warned of dangers with signs only some could read. This is absurd, the sheriff protested. We need to focus on finding a missing child, not chasing folklore. Robert Matthews had been silent, studying his son's notebook. He turned to another page, where Eli had mapped locations of unusual findings. Footprints, broken branches, stone arrangements. The map extended far beyond where the village's trails ended, into territory few adults ever ventured. Sarah, he said slowly, remember what my father always told us? About why he taught Eli the old ways? She nodded, tears welling. He said someday the mountain would choose someone to understand its secrets. I think it chose our son. The radio on Sheriff Kelly's belt crackled to life. Base, this is Search Team 3. We found something strange at the North Ridge. Looks like a campsite, but, well, you should see this. And there's blood. The room fell silent. Human blood? The sheriff asked sharply. Can't tell. But we also found this. A pause. A torn hunting jacket. Buck Thornton's by the look of the patches. Jim's expression darkened. A buck won't give up easily. If he's still tracking that creature, then he's tracking my son too, Robert finished, a new determination hardening his features. He turned to the search map, pointing to the deep forest areas Eli had marked in his notebook. We've been searching in the wrong places. We need to go here, where the old story said never to go. Morning sunlight dappled the ancient grove as Eli sat cross-legged beside a small stream, watching Coda demonstrate how to weave flexible reeds into a sturdy basket. The creature's massive fingers worked with surprising delicacy, their size belying their precision. Like this? Eli asked, attempting to mimic the technique. Coda made a gentle huffing sound, amusement Eli had learned, and reached over to adjust the boy's work. 3 days in the hidden valley had established patterns of communication that transcended their species' differences. Each hour brought new understanding between them. After the basket was completed, Coda led Eli to a sunny hillside dotted with small plants bearing red berries. The creature carefully selected only certain ones, showing Eli how to identify the edible varieties by their leaf patterns. These are safe to eat. But those aren't, Eli translated aloud as Coda demonstrated. The poisonous ones have serrated leaves instead of smooth. They collected berries in their newly woven basket, adding to their growing store of food. Eli had never eaten so well in the forest before. Coda's knowledge of edible plants, roots and fungi far exceeded even his grandfather's extensive teachings. Later, by a small pond reflecting the massive trees, Coda brought out a piece of wood he'd been carving. With focused concentration, the creature hollowed and shaped it, occasionally testing the sound by blowing gently across its surface. By midday, he had created a perfectly tuned whistle. Coda demonstrated its use, different patterns of short and long notes that carried remarkably far through the forest. Then, with deliberate care, he placed the whistle in Eli's hands. For me, Eli asked, surprised by the gift. Coda nodded, then showed Eli a specific pattern of notes. 3 short, 1 long pause, then 2 short. My signal, Eli understood. To call for help if I need you. The creature confirmed with another nod, then pointed to Eli's throat. You want me to talk? About what? Coda gestured broadly, encompassing the village beyond the mountains. About home? Eli settled back against a sun-warmed rock. Well, Pinecrest isn't much compared to this place. 57 people, mostly loggers, hunters, and a few who work at the clinic where my mum's a nurse. Dad runs the sawmill equipment, or did, before the cutbacks. As Eli described village life, Coda listened with unmistakable interest, head tilted slightly, eyes focused. Occasionally, the creature would make soft rumbling sounds of acknowledgement. "School's just one room for all the kids," Eli continued. "Mrs. Peterson teaches everyone from kindergarten through 8th grade. The older kids go to high school in Riverdale, almost an hour away by bus." When Eli mentioned specific landmarks, the general store, the community hall, his own home near the Eastern Creek, Coda would nod with surprising familiarity. Sometimes he would make gestures that suggested he knew exactly what Eli was describing. "Wait," Eli said, realizing the implication. "You know the village? You've been there?" Coda's response was a series of deliberate movements, mimicking stealth, showing darkness, indicating watching from distance. "You've observed us," Eli translated. "At night, from the forest edge." The creature confirmed, then stood to his full height, moving to a flat area of packed earth near the stream. There, he began to draw with a stick, crude but recognizable outlines of the village buildings, roads, even the playground where Eli and other children spent summer evenings. "You know everything about us," Eli whispered. Amazed, Coda added more details: the hunting paths, the creek that occasionally flooded, the old fire tower on the western ridge. His knowledge was comprehensive, spanning what must have been years of observation. Then the creature did something that left Eli speechless. It began making sounds, halting, awkward, but unmistakably attempting human speech. "Watch," Coda managed, the word rough but clear. "Warach, you can speak," Eli exclaimed, jumping to his feet in excitement. Coda made the huffing sound again, laughter, clearly pleased by the boy's reaction. "Lee-on," he continued, each syllable carefully formed. "Long time. How? When?" Eli asked, mind racing with questions. Coda pointed to his ears, then to distant sounds of birds and wind. "Lee-sten. Always Lee-sten." For the rest of the afternoon they practiced together, Eli speaking slowly, Coda repeating. The creature's vocabulary proved surprisingly extensive, though pronunciation remained challenging due to the different structure of his vocal anatomy. By sunset, Eli had learned that Coda understood nearly everything humans said. He had watched the village for decades and knew each family by their habits and homes. The creature described watching Eli grow from infant to child, always recognizing something different in him, an openness, a connection to the forest that most villagers lacked. "Is that why you trusted me?" Eli asked, as twilight deepened the shadows beneath the ancient trees. "Why you didn't hurt me when the hunters caught you?" "Knew you," Coda replied simply. "Heart sees heart." As stars appeared above the canopy, Eli practiced the whistle call again, the sound echoing through the sacred grove. In that moment, he felt the weight of trust being placed upon him, not just Coda's friendship, but the guardianship of ancient knowledge and the bridge between two worlds that had existed side by side for generations. He was no longer just a village boy lost in the forest. He had become something more, a keeper of secrets, a translator between species, perhaps even in his own small way, a guardian himself. Buck Thornton crouched in the pre-dawn gloom, studying marks on his detailed forest map by flashlight. His face was a landscape of scratches and stubble, eyes bloodshot from 4 days of relentless tracking. Davis and Collins huddled nearby, their earlier enthusiasm replaced by exhaustion and doubt. "We're going in circles," Collins muttered, nursing a sprained wrist. "These woods don't want us finding that thing." Buck's head snapped up. "Woods don't want anything. They're just trees." He tapped the map decisively. "The creature's movements follow patterns. It's staying within this territory, always returning to somewhere central. We just need to find the heart of its range." Davis stared into their small campfire. "What about the boy?" "We haven't seen any sign he's hurt. Stockholm Syndrome," Buck replied automatically. "Kid thinks the monster's his friend. Doesn't know he's a captive." The radio at Buck's hip crackled. "Buck, this is Weber. We've picked up strange tracks near the eastern ravine." "Looks fresh." Buck grabbed the radio. "Stay put. Mark your location on your map. We'll rendezvous at sunrise." As he tucked the radio away, a twig snapped in the darkness beyond their campfire. All three men froze, hands moving to weapons. "Just a deer," Collins whispered after several tense seconds of silence. Buck wasn't convinced. He stared into the darkness, feeling watched. "Get some rest. 2-hour shifts. I'll take first watch." Miles away on a parallel ridge, Jim led his own smaller tracking team, including Robert Matthews. Unlike Buck's aggressive pursuit, Jim followed signs with reverence, pausing to study broken branches and disturbed earth. Buck's path veered northwest, Jim observed, examining fresh boot prints. "He's getting closer to the old boundaries." "What boundaries?" Robert asked, voice hoarse from calling his son's name. Jim hesitated. "Places my father told me never to hunt. Sacred ground, he called it." Robert checked his rifle, an unfamiliar weight in his hands. He'd rarely hunted, preferring millwork to tracking game. "If my son's there, I don't care how sacred it is." "That's not what I meant," Jim said quietly. "Those boundaries were respected for a reason. Not fear of punishment, but recognition of balance. What lives beyond belongs there, has always belonged there." Robert's expression softened slightly. "Your father and mine shared those beliefs. I never understood their reverence for these mountains, but Eli does," Jim noted. "That's why the creature chose him." A radio transmission interrupted them, Sheriff Kelly coordinating the day's search grids. Multiple teams were now combing the mountains, some focused on finding Eli, others intent on documenting the creature that had captured the village's imagination. Unbeknownst to all the search parties, Coda had been aware of their movements for days. In the hidden valley, he emerged from pre-dawn meditation to find Eli already awake. Whittling a small piece of wood with his pocket knife. "Hunter's clothes," Coda said, his vocabulary growing daily through their practice sessions. "Buck tracks good," Eli nodded soberly. "I heard them yesterday." On the north ridge, Coda moved to a flat stone that served as a table of sorts. On it lay a crude map he'd created from clay, sticks, and colored stones, a three-dimensional representation of the surrounding mountains. Small wooden markers showed the positions of various search teams, updated through Coda's regular scouting. "Father here," Coda said, pointing to a marker near the eastern approach. "Comes with Jim," Eli's heart clenched. "My dad's looking for me. Mom must be so worried." Coda studied the boy's face with gentle understanding. 4 days of shared meals, language lessons, and forest skills had forged a bond between them that transcended their differences. The creature touched his chest over his heart, their shared gesture of trust. "Miss family," Coda observed. "Natural right. I do miss them," Eli admitted. "But I couldn't leave you wounded. And now—" He gestured to the hidden valley, the ancient trees, the evidence of Coda's solitary existence. "This needs protecting too." Coda nodded gravely, then pointed to Buck's marker, positioned alarmingly close to the valley's hidden entrance. "Problem comes. Buck finds path soon." Eli studied the map with growing concern. "Can we hide somewhere else? Deeper in the mountains?" "My home," Coda said simply. "Last place, last memories." He made the mournful sound that Eli had learned, signified thoughts of his lost family. "Then we defend it," Eli declared with 10-year-old certainty. "We can set false trails, lead them away." Coda considered this, then shook his massive head. "Storm comes." He pointed to the western sky where dark clouds were gathering over distant peaks. "Big water soon. Changes everything." As if confirming his prediction, thunder rumbled in the distance. Coda added more markers to the map, indicating water flow, potential flood zones. "Village danger?" Eli asked, understanding dawning. The creek that ran through Pinecrest had flooded before, but if Coda's weather sense was correct, this storm might be worse than usual. "Maybe," Coda acknowledged. "Need watch." Eli made a decision, reaching for the whistle Coda had carved. "I need to warn them if the flood's coming. My family, the village, they need to know." Coda's amber eyes reflected both understanding and concern. "Buck between us and village. Dangerous journey. Then we'll be careful," Eli said with the simple courage of youth. "You've taught me how to move unseen." For a long moment, Coda was silent, massive chest rising and falling with deep breaths. Then he began gathering supplies, medicinal plants, dried food, the water-resistant weaving they'd made from special grasses. Together, Coda said finally. Safer together. The sky darkened to an ominous green-black as Eli and Coda made their way across a high ridge. Wind whipped through the trees with increasing fury, bending even sturdy pines into precarious arcs. Thunder boomed closer now, lightning illuminating the mountain landscape in stark, brilliant flashes. "Bad storm," Coda rumbled, sniffing the air. "Worse than many seasons." They'd been traveling for hours, circling wide to avoid Buck's hunting party. Coda moved with remarkable stealth despite his size, teaching Eli to step where moss would muffle footfalls, to freeze when birds gave warning calls, to use the wind to carry scent away from potential trackers. A massive lightning bolt split the sky, striking a towering pine less than 50 yards ahead. The crack was deafening, the flash blinding. The ancient tree, at least 100 feet tall, split down its center, flames briefly licking at its core before the first heavy raindrops extinguished them. "Storm spirit angry," Coda observed, using a phrase Eli had learned referred to natural forces beyond control. The rain began in earnest then. Not the gentle forest rain that nourished and cleansed, but a violent deluge that hammered the earth with punishing force. Within minutes, small rivulets formed on the slopes, gathering speed and volume as they raced downhill. "We need shelter," Eli shouted over the storm's roar. Coda nodded, leading them toward an outcropping of rock that offered minimal protection. As they huddled beneath the overhang, Coda's keen hearing picked up something beyond the storm's fury. Human voices, panicked and nearby. "Someone hurt," he told Eli. Head tilted to better locate the sound, Eli strained to hear, catching only fragments between thunderclaps. "Leg trapped, and radio's dead," without hesitation. Coda emerged from their shelter, gesturing for Eli to stay put. The boy ignored the instruction, following the massive creature through sheets of driving rain. They found the source of the cries within minutes, a ravine where a flash flood had already begun forming, water churning over rocks with frightening speed. On a narrow ledge halfway down the ravine wall, a man clung desperately to exposed roots while trying to free his leg from between two boulders. Even through the rain, Eli recognized him, Collins, one of Buck's hunting party. "Help!" the man screamed upon seeing movement above, then froze in terror as he registered Coda's massive form. "Oh God, no! He's trapped!" Eli called out, stepping into view. "The water's rising!" Collins' terror transformed to disbelief. "Matthews, boy, you're alive!" "We need to help him," Eli told Coda, who was already assessing the situation with calculating eyes. The ravine walls were too steep and slippery for Eli to navigate safely, but Coda could manage the descent. With a meaningful look at Eli that clearly communicated "stay here," the creature began carefully picking his way down the treacherous slope. Collins watched in wide-eyed disbelief as his quarry approached. "What's it doing?" "Stay back. He's going to help you," Eli shouted over another thunderclap. "Let him." The water had reached Collins' waist now, its force threatening to tear him from his tenuous handhold. When Coda reached him, the hunter had no choice but to accept assistance. With extraordinary gentleness, the massive creature examined the trapped leg, then braced himself against the ravine wall and applied steady pressure to the smaller boulder. The rock shifted enough for Collins to pull free, his face contorted in pain as blood clouded the churning water. His leg was badly gashed, possibly broken. Without the support of the boulders, he began to slip toward the raging current below. Coda caught him with one powerful arm, cradling the injured hunter against his broad chest. With remarkable strength and agility, he climbed back up the ravine wall. Collins held securely despite the man's initial struggles. "Be still," Coda said, his deep voice startling the hunter into shocked compliance. Once on level ground, Coda carried Collins to their rock overhang and carefully set him down. Eli immediately began examining the injury, applying first aid techniques his mother had taught him. "The leg's broken," he reported, "and the cut needs stitches." Collins stared between the boy and the creature, his world view visibly shattering. He talks? His name is Coda, Eli explained, tearing strips from his own shirt for bandages. And he just saved your life. Coda had already begun gathering specific leaves and moss, natural medicines Eli now recognized. Together, they stabilized Colin's leg with improvised splints and packed the wound with the medicinal plants that would stem bleeding and prevent infection. "Why?" Collins finally asked, watching Coda's careful movements. "We hunted you, tried to capture you." Coda met his eyes directly. "Life valuable. All life." Thunder crashed directly overhead, and the intensity of the rain somehow increased further. Small streams became rushing torrents across the mountainside. In the distance, they heard an ominous cracking, the sound of trees being uprooted by wind or water. Buck and Davis, Collins remembered suddenly. "They're camped by Eagle Creek Basin." Coda and Eli exchanged alarmed glances. Eagle Creek Basin would be among the first areas to flood in this deluge. "Village also danger," Coda said, his limited vocabulary conveying urgent concern. "Water gather, rush down. Pinecrest could flood?" Collins asked, fear for his family overriding his pain. "My wife, my kids, we need to warn them all," Eli decided. "But we can't leave you here." Coda nodded in agreement, then made a complex series of gestures indicating dividing their path, himself going toward the basin to find the other hunters. Eli and Collins staying on higher ground to avoid floodwaters. "No," Eli protested. "We should stay together. More lives at risk," Coda replied simply. He touched his heart, then Eli's, their gesture of trust and connection. "Find higher path to village. Warn people. I find hunters. Bring to safe ground." The decision weighed heavily in the air between them, punctuated by another deafening thunderclap and the distant sound of a massive tree crashing down. "Promise you'll be careful," Eli insisted. "Promise you'll find me after." Coda made the gentle huffing sound of amusement, despite the dire circumstances. "Always find you." Rain pounded like hammer blows as Eli helped Collins navigate the treacherous hillside. The hunter leaned heavily on a makeshift crutch, face gray with pain, but determined. Their progress was agonizingly slow. "There's a ranger shelter 2 miles east," Collins gasped between labored breaths. "Radio equipment, emergency supplies," Eli nodded, adjusting his grip on the man's waist. Lightning split the sky again, momentarily illuminating the valley below. What he saw made his blood run cold. Raging water had already transformed peaceful streams into brown, debris-filled torrents that ripped trees from the earth like weeds. "The village," he whispered. "It's directly in the path of all that water." Collins followed his gaze. "Sweet Jesus, if those channels converge!" They pushed forward with renewed urgency. The ranger shelter appeared just as Eli's strength began to falter. A solid log structure built on stilts to withstand precisely this type of flooding. Inside, Collins collapsed onto a cot while Eli frantically searched for the radio. He found it mounted near a desk covered with topographical maps. His grandfather had taught him basic radio protocol during fire seasons. "Mayday, mayday," he called after powering up the unit. "This is Eli Matthews at Northeast Ranger Station 3. Emergency flood warning for Pinecrest Valley." Only static answered. Collins dragged himself over, adjusting dials with practiced movements. Transmitter might be damaged. Storm interference too. Eli wouldn't be deterred. He repeated the call every 30 seconds, desperation mounting with each failed attempt. On the 6th try, a broken voice crackled through. "Copy. This is Sheriff Kelly. Eli, is that you? Over. Yes." Eli nearly shouted into the microphone. "Sheriff, the village needs to evacuate immediately. Multiple watersheds are converging. It's going to be worse than the 97 flood. Where are you? Are you safe? Your parents—" "I'm fine," Eli interrupted. "But Pinecrest isn't. The water's coming from all directions, not just the main creek." A new voice broke through. His father. "Eli, thank God, we've been searching everywhere. Dad, listen. You need to get everyone to higher ground. Now, not just to the community hall like last time. The water's going to be much higher." There was a pause. Then his father's voice returned, steadier. "I understand. We're mobilizing everyone. Can you stay where you are?" "Yes, but—" Eli hesitated, looking at Collins, who gave a slight nod. "I'm with Mr. Collins. He's hurt." "And Dad?" "Coda's gone to help the other hunters." "Coda?" "The Bigfoot. That's his name. He saved Mr. Collins. He's been protecting me this whole time." The radio hissed with static. When his father spoke again, his voice had changed. "Are you saying the creature is real? And friendly?" "More than friendly," Collins interjected, leaning toward the microphone. "Robert, it's Tom Collins. Your boy's telling the truth. That thing, Coda, pulled me out of floodwaters when he could have left me to drown. Everything we thought we knew was wrong." While they spoke, Eli studied the topographical maps, suddenly understanding Coda's deeper concern. With his finger, he traced the water's likely path, not just toward Pinecrest, but converging from multiple mountain streams into a funnel-like valley that would direct the full force of the flood directly into the village center. "Dad," he interrupted urgently, "the old fire road won't be high enough. You need to get everyone to Hawk's Ridge. That's more than a mile uphill in this weather, son. It's the only place that's safe." Eli's voice broke slightly. "Trust me, please. I've seen what's coming." There was a moment of silence before Sheriff Kelly's voice returned. "We're implementing evacuation now. Eli, stay put until we can send someone for you." The radio went silent as a particularly violent gust of wind rocked the small shelter. Eli stared out the window at the worsening storm, thinking of Coda somewhere out there searching for Buck and Davis. His hand found the wooden whistle around his neck, but he knew its sound couldn't carry against the storm's fury. "Your Bigfoot friend," Collins said quietly. "He really understands all this? The flooding patterns, the danger?" Eli nodded. "Better than anyone. His people have lived in these mountains for generations. They know things we've forgotten or never learned." Collins' expression reflected dawning comprehension. The warning signs by the creek last spring, strange rock formations that appeared overnight, the fallen trees that somehow always redirected flash floods away from the hiking trails. That was him, wasn't it? Protecting us. Him and his family before they were gone, Eli confirmed. Guardians, just like my grandfather called them. Outside, a massive section of hillside gave way with a sound like tearing fabric. Mud and trees slid in a chaotic mass toward the valley floor, adding to the destructive force gathering below. The shelter creaked ominously as wind buffeted its sturdy frame. Through the rain-lashed window, Eli could just make out the distant lights of Pinecrest, unaware of how little time remained before the converging waters reached them. "They'll need proof," Collins said suddenly. "About Coda. People like Buck, they won't believe without seeing." Eli turned from the window, an idea forming. "Then we need to show them." With sudden determination, he grabbed the shelter's emergency pack and began filling it with supplies. "The village needs more than a warning. They need help only Coda can provide." "What are you thinking, boy?" "We need to find Coda, then get to the village ahead of the flood," Eli explained, slinging the pack over his shoulder. "We need to show everyone what he really is." Collins gestured helplessly at his broken leg. "I'll slow you down." "Then I'll go alone," Eli decided, faced with the hardest choice he'd made since offering his treasures for Coda's freedom. "Can you operate the radio? Keep trying to reach the village?" The hunter nodded slowly, respect evident in his gaze. "Be careful out there. That creature, Coda, he clearly cares about you, but those mountains don't care about anyone." Eli paused at the door, rain already soaking him as he stepped onto the porch. "That's where you're wrong, Mr. Collins. The mountains care deeply. We just stopped listening. The storm's fury had transformed the familiar forest into an alien landscape. Trees lay uprooted, streams overflowed their banks, and the earth itself seemed to be dissolving beneath the relentless rain. Yet somehow, miraculously, Eli found Coda. The massive creature emerged from the downpour like a spirit, carrying an unconscious Davis over one shoulder. Behind him trudged Buck Thornton, face a mask of conflicted emotions, fear, awe, reluctant gratitude. "Eli," Coda rumbled, relief evident in his deep voice. "Safe! The flood's coming," Eli shouted over the storm's roar. "Worse than we thought. I warned the village by radio, but some won't believe," Buck interrupted, his certainty fractured but pride intact. not without seeing. Understanding passed between them, enemies briefly united by crisis. Buck had clearly witnessed enough to shake his convictions, though not enough to fully surrender them. Village needs see, Coda agreed, gently shifting the unconscious hunter to a more secure position. Show truth. Together they began the treacherous descent toward Pinecrest, following game trails that avoided the worst flooding. Twice Coda's strength saved them, pulling Buck from a sudden sinkhole, catching Eli when a muddy slope gave way beneath his feet. As they neared the village boundary, Eli gasped at the transformation below. Evacuation was underway, but confusion reigned. Some residents headed toward the community hall on its small rise, sufficient for normal flooding, but dangerously inadequate for what approached. Others gathered possessions rather than moving to safety. Emergency vehicles' lights flashed through the rain, their sirens inaudible against the storm. They don't understand, Eli said, desperation rising. The water's coming from 3 directions, not just the main creek. Buck studied the valley with a hunter's eye. Boy's right. Those waters converge right at the village center. Minutes at most. Coda surveyed the scene, then made a decision. Gently placing Davis against a relatively dry trunk, he straightened to his full height, an imposing silhouette against the storm-dark sky. Show them, he told Eli. Together, side by side, the massive forest guardian and the small boy emerged from the tree line at the village edge. For a moment, no one noticed them. Then a woman, turning to gather more supplies, froze mid-motion, pointing with a trembling hand. Look! Faces turned. A collective gasp rose from the nearest group. Sheriff Kelly reached instinctively for his holster, while Mayor Wilson stumbled backward in shock. "Don't shoot!" Eli shouted, stepping protectively in front of Coda. "He's here to help." "Eli!" His mother's voice cut through the chaos. Sarah Matthews pushed through the crowd, Robert close behind her. She stopped short, eyes widening at the towering creature beside her son. "Mom, Dad!" Eli said, standing his ground. "This is Coda." Coda lowered his massive head in a respectful greeting. "Dangur," he rumbled, pointing toward the converging waters visible now even from the village. "Big water comes." The simple speech from this legendary creature shocked the villagers into momentary silence. Then Buck Thornton emerged from the forest edge, supporting the semi-conscious Davis. "Listen to them!" Buck called, his authoritative voice commanding attention. "Everything we believed about this creature was wrong. He saved our lives up there. Now he's trying to save all of yours." Jim stepped forward from the crowd, face alight with vindication. "I told you. The Guardians are real." Confusion erupted, some villagers backing away in fear, others moving closer in fascination. Sheriff Kelly kept his hand on his weapon while trying to maintain order. "Everyone to the community hall," Mayor Wilson shouted above the commotion. "We can sort this out once we're safe from the flood." "No!" Eli's voice carried surprising authority for a 10-year-old. "The community hall isn't high enough. The water's coming from everywhere. We need to reach Hawk's Ridge." As if to punctuate his warning, a sound like distant thunder rolled through the valley, but no lightning accompanied it. Coda's head snapped up, his sensitive hearing detecting what humans could not yet perceive. "Water wall comes," he announced gravely. "No time." Robert Matthews made a swift decision, stepping forward to stand beside his son and the forest guardian. "I believe them. Everyone grab only what you can carry and head for Hawk's Ridge immediately." Mayor Wilson wavered, looking to Sheriff Kelly for guidance. The sheriff's face reflected his inner conflict, professional skepticism battling with the evidence before him. A village elder, Mrs. Whitaker, pushed through the crowd with surprising strength for her 90 years. From her coat pocket, she withdrew a yellowed newspaper clipping, holding it up despite the rain. 1932, she announced in a quavering voice. "My father was 7 years old. He and 3 other children were caught in Sawmill Canyon during the spring melt. Something carried them to safety, something the adults refused to believe in." This was his drawing. The simple, childish sketch clearly depicted a massive, upright figure carrying small children through floodwaters. "The Guardians have always protected this valley," Mrs. Whitaker continued. "When we respected the old boundaries, the old ways. A low rumbling grew louder, no longer distant but imminent. At the lower end of the village, water began surging between buildings with frightening speed. Higher ground. Sheriff Kelly ordered, professional training overriding his disbelief. Now, as the evacuation redirected toward the ridge path, Sarah Matthews approached Coda cautiously. The creature remained perfectly still, allowing her to study him. "You protected my son," she said simply. Coda touched his chest over his heart, then gestured to Eli. Heart sees heart. Understanding bloomed on Sarah's face. She nodded once, then turned to help organize the evacuating villagers. The flood's leading edge reached the first houses as the exodus toward Hawk's Ridge began in earnest. Coda moved to the front of the group, his massive strength clearing fallen debris from the path, his intimate knowledge of the mountain landscape guiding them towards safety. Behind them, Pinecrest Village began to disappear beneath the rising waters. The narrow path to Hawk's Ridge turned treacherous as rain-saturated earth gave way beneath hurrying feet. Coda moved with purpose at the front of the procession, his massive hands breaking branches that blocked the trail, his strength steadying elders who stumbled on slick ground. Behind him, villagers who hours earlier might have fled at his appearance now followed with desperate trust. The Johnson family hasn't come up, Mayor Wilson realized halfway up the ridge, doing a mental count of villagers. They live at the far end of Maple Street. Sheriff Kelly consulted his radio. No response from that sector. Phone lines are down too. Without hesitation, Coda turned to Eli. A look of understanding passed between them. "I'll help find them," Eli volunteered. "Absolutely not," Sarah Matthews interjected, gripping her son's shoulder. "You're staying where I can see you." Coda made a soft rumbling sound that somehow conveyed reassurance. From a pouch fashioned of woven grasses, he withdrew coils of strong vine rope, quickly fashioning a harness that he secured around his massive torso. "Carry people," he explained, demonstrating how smaller humans could be secured against his broad chest, leaving his arms free for climbing and maneuvering. Robert Matthews stepped forward. "I know where the Johnsons live. I'll guide you." Sarah began to protest, but her husband's determined expression silenced her. This was the same man who had avoided the deep forest for years, who preferred the predictable mechanical world of the sawmill to the mysteries of the wilderness. Yet here he stood, willing to venture back into danger alongside a creature from legend. "I'm coming too," Buck announced unexpectedly. When others looked surprised, he shrugged. "Nobody knows swift water rescue better than me." Coda nodded, adjusting the rope harness to accommodate human companions. The improvised rescue team set off down the trail, leaving Eli watching anxiously from between his mother and Jim. The village had transformed in the brief time since evacuation began. What had been streets were now muddy rivers carrying debris, furniture, propane tanks, sections of wooden decking. The community hall, which many had initially considered safe haven, now stood with water reaching its windowsills. Coda navigated the flood with surprising skill, using fallen trees as bridges, guiding Robert and Buck across currents that would have swept humans away. His heightened senses detected dangers invisible to his companions, weakened structures, submerged obstacles, unstable ground. They found the Johnson family, parents, grandmother, and twin 5-year-olds, trapped on their second-floor balcony as water lapped at the floorboards. The approach to the house had become a raging channel impossible for humans to cross. "We can't reach them," Buck shouted over the storm's fury. Coda studied the distance, making calculations no human would attempt. Without explanation, he secured the vine ropes around Buck and Robert's waists, anchoring them to a still-standing utility pole. Then, with a powerful leap that defied his massive size, he crossed the churning water, catching the edge of the Johnsons' roof and pulling himself up. The family's terror at the creature's appearance quickly transformed to desperate relief as Coda fashioned secure harnesses for the children first. With gentle efficiency that belied his enormous hands, he strapped the twins against his chest in the rope carrier. "Trust," he told the wide-eyed children, who nodded solemnly. The return leap across the flood channel was even more impressive under the added weight. Coda landed with precision on the small island of relative stability where Buck and Robert waited. The hunter took charge of the children, while Coda immediately returned for the adults. 3 trips later, all 5 Johnsons stood safely on solid ground, drenched but alive. Mrs. Johnson, initially speechless at their unlikely rescuer, finally managed a tearful "thank you." Coda acknowledged her gratitude with the gentle huffing sound Eli had identified as his version of a smile. Their journey back to Hawk's Ridge proved harder than the descent. The floodwaters rose with frightening speed, cutting off previously passable routes. Twice they were forced to change direction when landmarks disappeared beneath the surging brown water. At a particularly dangerous crossing, Coda fashioned a makeshift raft from a garage door and fallen timbers. The Johnsons huddled at its center while Buck and Robert helped Coda guide it through the current using long poles. They were halfway across when a massive section of someone's deck slammed into the makeshift craft, tipping one edge underwater. The youngest Johnson twin, Emily, slid toward the churning flood with a terrified scream. Buck lunged for her but lost his balance, both of them plunging into the raging waters. The current immediately swept them downstream, toward a tangle of submerged debris. Without hesitation, Coda dove into the flood, his powerful strokes cutting through currents that would have overwhelmed any human swimmer. He reached Buck first, who had managed to grab Emily but couldn't fight the water's power. "Take her!" Buck gasped, lifting the child toward Coda. The creature secured Emily with one arm, but didn't abandon Buck. Instead, he gripped the hunter's jacket with his free hand, pulling both toward a partially submerged car that provided momentary sanctuary from the current. From there, Coda navigated the floodwaters, with Emily secured against his chest and Buck clinging to his broad shoulders. The journey back to the raft took every ounce of the creature's legendary strength. When they finally rejoined the others, Buck's expression had transformed completely. Gone was any trace of the hardened hunter who had pursued Coda with such determination. In its place was humbled gratitude mixed with profound reassessment. "You could have left me," he said quietly as they continued toward higher ground. After everything, Coda's response was simple. All life matters. By the time they reached Hawk's Ridge, darkness had fallen, but the evacuated villagers had created a makeshift camp with emergency supplies and hastily erected shelters. A ragged cheer went up as the rescue party appeared with the Johnsons. Eli broke away from his mother's side, running to meet them. His face lit with relief when he saw Coda, seemingly unharmed despite the ordeal. The boy's expression held no surprise at the creature's heroics, only the quiet confirmation of what he had known all along about his friend's true nature. In the flickering light of emergency lanterns, surrounded by the community he had long observed but never joined, Coda stood as living proof that sometimes the most fearsome legends conceal the most noble truths. Dawn broke over Hawk's Ridge, painting the devastation below in harsh clarity. Nearly half of Pinecrest Village lay submerged under muddy water. Homes had been swept from foundations, roads washed away, the community hall's roof barely visible above the flood. Yet among the evacuees, the mood was not of despair, but of quiet gratitude. They had survived, all of them, thanks to timely warning and extraordinary help. Coda stood slightly apart, watching the sunrise with ancient eyes that had witnessed many seasons of destruction and rebirth. Beside him, Eli leaned against his massive form with the easy comfort of profound friendship. "What happens now?" the boy asked softly. Before Coda could answer, Mayor Wilson approached, followed by a small delegation including Sheriff Kelly, Jim, and several village elders. Their expressions were solemn, but no longer fearful. "On behalf of Pinecrest," the mayor began formally, "I want to thank you for your help. Without your warning and assistance, we would have suffered terrible losses." Coda acknowledged this with a dignified nod. "The question remains," the sheriff added, "what happens when the waters recede?" This changes everything we thought we knew about these mountains. Mrs. Whitaker stepped forward, her aged hand reaching fearlessly to touch Coda's arm. Not changes, reminds. My grandfather spoke of a covenant between our people and the forest guardians. Boundaries respected, balance maintained, boundaries we've been pushing against for decades, Jim noted. Logging deeper into old growth, new housing developments, hunting in protected areas. Buck Thornton, who had spent the night helping organize shelter for displaced families, joined the conversation. The hunter's transformation was remarkable. Humility had replaced arrogance. Respect had supplanted conquest. The research grant I was pursuing, he said quietly. They'd want to study him, capture him, turn him into a specimen or an attraction. Coda's expression remained impassive, but Eli felt a subtle tension in his massive frame. No, the boy said firmly. That can't happen. Coda isn't a discovery or a resource. He's a person, the last of his kind here, protecting land that was his family's home for generations before we arrived. Robert Matthews placed a supportive hand on his son's shoulder. The boy's right. We have a choice about the story we tell the outside world. A thoughtful silence fell over the group. Below, the floodwaters had begun their slow recession, revealing the monumental task of rebuilding that lay ahead. Perhaps, Mayor Wilson suggested carefully, as far as official records are concerned. We were saved by early warning systems and community preparation. The details remain our village's private history, Sheriff Kelly nodded slowly. The county won't question that version. They'll be focused on disaster relief, not legends. Coda, who had remained silent throughout this discussion, finally spoke. His deep voice carried the weight of consideration beyond human timeframes. Ancient balance, he rumbled. Humans here, Coda's people there. He gestured first to the valley, then to the deep forest. Both protect boundary, both respect. A new covenant, Mrs. Whitaker translated. But this time, remembered and honored. From a pouch at his side, Coda withdrew something he had been carving during the quiet hours of night watch, a wooden medallion on a leather cord. Into its surface, he had etched symbols, a small human figure and a larger forest guardian standing together beneath stylized mountains, surrounded by a circle representing continuity. With ceremonial solemnity, he placed it around Eli's neck. Symbol of promise, he explained. Friend to friend, people to guardian. Now to always. Eli touched the medallion reverently, understanding the profound responsibility it represented. I'll never forget, he promised. And I'll make sure others remember too, in the days that followed. As floodwaters receded and rebuilding began, decisions were made that would reshape Pinecrest's relationship with the surrounding wilderness. The logging boundary was formally re-established beyond the old-growth forest. Hunting regulations were revised to protect certain areas entirely. A conservation trust was formed to preserve the mountain's natural balance. Coda remained a shadow presence, sometimes glimpsed at forest edges during emergencies, occasionally leaving signs that only certain villagers could interpret. But no longer a figure of fear or superstition. For most outside visitors, he remained a local legend. His actual existence, a closely guarded community secret. Eli visited the hidden valley regularly, sometimes accompanied by his father or Jim, who were gradually learning the forest wisdom Coda had to share. The boy became a bridge between worlds, translating not just language, but perspectives across the ancient divide between human and guardian. One crisp autumn day, as golden leaves drifted through the ancient grove, Coda led Eli to a remote ridge overlooking territories so distant they had never appeared on any human map. Others there, the guardian said, pointing toward faraway peaks. My kind, few, hidden, waiting. Eli's heart leaped with hope. You're not the last? There are more like you? Coda made his gentle huffing sound of amusement. Family, different groups. Stay apart for safety, but know each other. The revelation opened new possibilities, not just preservation of what remained, but perhaps someday renewal. As they sat watching the sunset paint the endless forest in amber and gold, Eli felt the weight of the wooden medallion against his chest, a promise that would outlive him, passed down through generations of his family as they continued to protect the boundary between worlds. "Your great journey soon," Coda said, gesturing toward the boy with affectionate understanding. "Growing, learning, becoming. I'll always come back," Eli promised. Coda nodded, his ancient eyes reflecting wisdom beyond human comprehension. "No, you will. Some humans born with forest in heart, like grandfather. Like you." The Guardian touched his massive hand to Eli's chest in their familiar gesture of connection. Not just friend now, family. As stars emerged above the mountain sanctuary they shared, Guardian and boy sat in companionable silence, their unlikely friendship having transformed not just their own lives, but the future of two worlds that had forgotten how to coexist in harmony. The broken balance was healing, one relationship at a time.